Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the South Florida Tribune Broadcasting Network. We are live here, or somewhat live, on the Sports Exchange. We'll be live soon enough. But anyways, we have ourselves a great show lined up. And we're going to lead it off with Ryan Skolrud, who's going to talk about some fantasy football.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
We're doing just fine, thank you.
Welcome to the show.
Well, I think the obvious first news to talk about tonight, I think is probably the Ron Rivera news. It's hard to say what fantasy impact that's actually going to have for these last few weeks as we get into the fantasy playoffs. But as of right now, it's definitely interesting that even with just a few games left, that they felt that it was time to make this move. As far as the implications for players, obviously, Kyle Allen really is the only quarterback that they've got. They're not really going to make any wholesale changes as far as I can tell, as far as the staff is concerned. The defensive backs coach has now become the head coach, or the interim head coach, and Norv Turner is what they're calling special assistant to the head coach, while Norv's son, I believe it's Scott Turner, becomes the acting offensive coordinator. So it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic works. But definitely, tough news, especially for Cam Newton. He posts a very big social media post about what Ron Rivera meant to him as a head coach. So it'll be interesting to see, with this change being made, how many other wholesale changes over the offseason get made. And so really, in terms of fantasy news, this more affects, I think, dynasty players and what could be going on in the offseason.
Okay, well, with leading off with Ron Rivera, what other pointers do you have for everybody out there?
Well, as far as some injuries go, both Juju Smith-Schuster and James Conner are expected to miss Week 14 against the Cardinals. I believe that game is in Arizona. So obviously that means that elevates the possible production for James Washington and Deontay Thompson, who really are the two wide receivers for the Pittsburgh Steelers right now. It also means that we're going to continue with a timeshare in the running back for the running backs between Jalen Samuels and Benny Snell, and so it's really in terms of this game. I think them missing time will mean more for James Washington, and then also for Vance McDonald. We keep saying over and over and over again how bad the Arizona Cardinals are against tight ends. Well, they proved it again last week when Tyler Higbee, the backup tight end for the LA Rams, was the number one tight end in fantasy. And that's not the first time that a backup tight end has been a top 3 tight end in fantasy going up against the Arizona Cardinals. So, Ross Dwelly, the backup at San Francisco for the 49ers, is another guy that's done, the same thing. So, Vance McDonald should be in for a good game. He should be, get wide open in multiple occasions, and should finish this game with at least one touchdown. So, as far as those injuries are concerned, I think it's big for James Washington, and especially for Vance McDonald in this game coming up in Week 14, which again, first round of fantasy playoffs for those teams for those leagues that do 3-week playoffs. This is the beginning. So. Another injury to look at is Dalvin Cook. We talked about last night in the waiver wire. One of the guys that had been mentioned in articles on SkullKingFootball.com on my website. Alexander Madison is the guy that had been mentioned. If you own Dalvin Cook, he's the guy that should be picked up. Well, then in the Monday Night Football game last night, Dalvin Cook sat the entire second half after getting hit kind of in the chest and shoulder area. Well, what happened was it looked like he re-aggravated or re-injured. It's not broken, but it's basically like a bone bruise of his clavicle his collarbone, which he got hit in the game against the Broncos. So he says that he should be good to go for this next week. That being said, it could open up a big door for Alexander Madison to get a whole lot more playing time against a Detroit defense that, is another one of those that, couldn't stop, running water. So I think that their defense should open up a lot of holes if Alexander Madison plays for him to be able to produce quite well in the first round of the playoffs. So that's another major injury that I think could be very influential in how teams create their lineups for the fantasy players.
Okay. And Carson and Penny may become a better version of Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, it is. Yes. And if you look at what's happened the last couple of weeks, the Minnesota Vikings, now I understand that Kirk Cousins on the offense has had his struggles on Monday Night Football. He is now 0-8. He is now officially the worst starting quarterback in Monday Night Football history. That being said, that has nothing to do with the fact that the Minnesota Vikings have the number 5 run defense and got absolutely mowed over and had I think the Seattle Seahawks had 140 rushing yards by the third quarter. Rashad Penny had over 100 combined yards last night. You had Carson, who finished with over 100 rushing yards and a touchdown. Penny had 2 touchdowns himself. And so if you look at the way that they're starting to split them up, the Penny is really getting going. Jamal Williams was a constant contributor all throughout this season. And really, we looked at a lot of split time, not knowing which player was going to be the guy to get all the work. Well, between him and Aaron Jones. Well, now they're kind of leveling it out, but the Seahawks are really getting their feet going. And so I think that with how this offense is getting going in Seattle, those two could produce very well as an RB2 and a flex play, even better than Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams have so far this season.
Okay, let's go over a couple of other things that came to mind. David Johnson, what's going on with him? He doesn't seem to be playing much these days out in Arizona.
David Johnson has been dealing with a back injury most of the season, and so he's basically they're kind of managing him for right now and just using Kenyon Drake as the main running back. So I don't think he's ever fully healthy. I think they should have just put him on IR. But with all the injuries that they've had to deal with in the running backs, they haven't really had much of a choice. So,
have they? If you're a fantasy person, you have David Johnson. Do you keep him or do you add somebody else?
I would add somebody else.
Okay, and obviously we know this Cardinals-Steelers game is a rematch of Super Bowl 43, which, by the way, I was at that game when I saw that long touchdown by James
Harrison.
That's it. There was some great plays there. So, for those history buffs, obviously the players are different, but a little bit of a Super Bowl rematch nonetheless. How about some observations last night of the Seattle Seahawks 37-30 win over Minnesota in your neck of the woods?
Well, as far as the Seahawks go, it always seems to be some sort of pressure cooker type of game. The hashtag going around in Seattle is the Seahawks always get my blood pressure going. No matter what the game. So, it looked like they had it pretty much sealed up with the interception and touchdown in the beginning, or the interception at the end of the third, and then the touchdown in the fourth to go up by, 17 points or so. And then, next thing you know, they're allowing a few plays, pass interference, a 30-yard pass interference call gets called. So, I mean, as far as the offense goes, it's concerning for guys like Tyler Lockett, who have not gotten the amount of targets over the last few weeks. Really, the target share has gone to guys like Jacob Hollister. Even David Moore has gotten more targets over the last couple weeks than Tyler Lockett has. And for a guy who is, a top top 15 wide receiver for the first half of the season. It's definitely been concerning. I don't think his leg is an issue, but it could be hard to trust him going into the fantasy playoffs. Russell Wilson is going to do Russell Wilson things. He is going to finish with usually 200 to 250 passing yards and at least a couple touchdowns. That's just what he does. Carson and Penny seem to really have created a good, a solid core for offense in the running back positions. I think both could be very solid producers in the fantasy playoffs. And as far as the Vikings go, I still think they have a solid defense to be used in the fantasy playoffs, depending on the matchup. I think next week against Detroit is a good matchup to have them for. Kirk Cousins is still a solid quarterback, still put up decent numbers, just wasn't timely enough to get the win. And Stephon Diggs, again, should be a solid contributor. I think that he'll do better, though, once Adam Thielen gets back. And if Adam Thielen gets back, I believe that creates more of a two-headed monster to provide more open areas for Diggs to get open if Thielen can pull some coverage. So,
all right, let's talk about a Seattle note per se that took place, and that's Chris Peterson stepping down as coach for the Washington Huskies.
Yes. That was definitely for a lot of fans, it was surprising. Apparently, for a lot of people around Chris Peterson, it was not surprising. There's already speculation that, he's going to go to USC or he's going to go to somewhere else. And honestly, for me, I don't see him going to USC. He is very much a quiet, doesn't like the limelight if he doesn't have to be in it kind of a guy. And so I think that he steps back into, he even in his press conference said, I'm not going to fall into the trap of saying I'm never going to coach again. Football is going to be there for me somehow. He just doesn't know what capacity that's going to be. So I think that he may step back into coaching, but after 8 years at Boise State and then 6 years in Washington at the UW, and having the just unbelievable career that he has and the winning percentage that he has had, that takes a lot of work, a lot of effort, and I think that it very well could just be burnout, especially when you consider how much work that coaches have to go into with the recruiting and all that, and basically sucking up to a bunch of teenagers to try to get them to come to their school. I can see how that is just a grind that can only last for so long.
Yeah, let me add to that, too. I would see Peterson possibly looking at NFL things down the road. It's not uncommon for college coaches to want to go in the NFL with the right situation. So that's something I would wonder about. And one last thing I want to mention, what are they talking about Mike Leach's beat down of a reporter in light of what took place? He came across as pretty upset.
Well, the thing here's what's going on with Mike Leach is a character in and of himself.
Right.
The reporter that he went off on is a guy that writes for one of the Spokane newspapers, which is just north of Pullman. Spokane's the second or third largest city in the state of Washington. And the reporter basically got on, just kind of been poking at Mike Leach's entire career. And this being, I want to say either this is the 7th consecutive season that Washington State has lost to Washington in the Apple Cup. And so definitely, I think it was just enough of a poke that this reporter's kind of been poking holes in Leach's career at Washington State and how he's never really been able to win the big one. And since I want to say even the year before, since Peterson got to Washington, the Cougars just have not been able to overcome the Huskies in the Apple Cup, even when they've had probably better teams. So I think it was just a touchy subject.